mann som öknar bruk och snuttar.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, world. So in the part one, we went over a lot of basics, right? And we went over all the P tags and IDs and classes, and then we learned about the style and then the external style sheets. Then we did the pilot analogy for how to use IDs and classes and styling. And one thing I wanted to talk about was earlier in that tutorial, we had the style tags that were within the body. Now, you can put the style tags there, and I said, don't let anyone tell you that that's not okay. Well, with the wild, wild west of development, you know, people just kind of do whatever they want. But the old school way, the semantic way, the style tag should be put in the head. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that, and I'll come up here in the head and I'll paste it, right? I'll paste all the styles up into the head, right? You have the head here, the opening tag there, and then the closing tag here, and we no longer have the styles within the body. And you can still legitimately do that, but the proper way to do it is to have that in the head. So let's go ahead and test this out. Now we're still linked to the style sheet, right? So we need to unlink this. And to unlink it, it's really simple. All you have to do is come up here and comment the code. So just highlight it and hit hold Control and then hit the slash key, and you've commented out that code. So that code, this link is not going to be read by the browser. So let's go ahead and hit save, Control S. Let's go ahead and save it, Control S to save it. And let's come to the browser to see if it still works. And hey, it still works. So you can put the style tags in here, but that's not the proper way to do it, but a lot of people do that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but this is the better way to do it. I wanted to clarify that before we continue on with the series. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. We'll go ahead and just delete all that. We'll tighten up the code, and we'll come in here and to uncomment, you just highlight it like we did before and hit Control and then the // button, and there you go. You've uncommented out, and we need to save it, Control S, and we're like, once again, we're linked to this style sheet. And for those of you who are wondering what REL means, that means relation. And it's basically saying this link is related to a style sheet. But okay, so let's go check it out. Come up here and we'll hold Control and mouse click left to refresh, to do a hard cache flush refresh, and it works. So now with that out of the way, I want to go ahead and move on with the rest of the tutorial. In this lesson, I want to talk about HTML tags, and one of the websites that I want to recommend to you if you're starting to learn how to code is called W3 Schools. And when I started to learn how to code, I found this website way back in the day, and it's always been a great website, and they have so many things that you can learn. And what I like about this particular website is that it's not blasting with you with ads and all these pop-ups and stuff like that, and I'm running Brave, just so you know, but the thing is, it's laid out really, really nicely, and it'll walk you through all these different things here, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, SQL, Python, all this stuff up here. And it's such a great website. It's, you know, learning by examples, and it's cleanly and easily laid out. You know, you're not running all over the place, and it's really easy to follow as a beginner, and you can do it right here. You can come here on the page, right, and you can actually try the code yourself, and you can come in here, and they have like a online mini editor where you can come in here and change stuff, right? I just made an edit right here, so you hit run and it does it in real time. So this way you don't have to have a code editor. You can learn right here on the website, which is really, really cool. And it's laid out in such a simple, easy way without a bunch of distractions and drawings and flashing lights and bells and whistles. And it's really, really a really good website, I believe, to learn. And you can get lost in this thing. I mean, you can spend weeks if you wanted to. And but yeah, just I wanted to let you know, and I'll link that in the description. So actually referencing the W3 schools, I want to talk about some of the HTML tags. And in part 1, I mentioned the word semantic elements, HTML semantic elements, right? They have a really good definition of what semantic and non-semantic means. And a semantic element clearly describes its meaning to both the browser and the developer. And we haven't done a div tag yet or a span, but examples of non-semantic elements are div and span tags, and that tells you nothing about its contents. And you'll see when we start laying out our web page, we'll use divs as a container to hold the text in, right? And examples of semantic elements are like things like the image tag, the tables tag, the article tag. And if you remember, back in the old days, we had a thing called a newspaper, right? So back in the day when websites were just getting started, well, what did they model the web page after? There's a reason why we say HTML document or file, because it's actually referencing like a tangible piece of paper or a newspaper. And well, newspapers, you may remember those ancient dinosaur means of communication, but they kind of had like this image you're seeing right here. A newspaper had a header, and it didn't really have a nav, but for browsing purposes, they incorporated a nav. And then, well, newspapers have a section, and you have an article, and you have an aside, and you have a footer. So these were kind of modeled after like paper books and newspapers and things like that. And you can see here in HTML, there are several semantic elements that can be used to define different parts of a web page. And in this day and age of frameworks and things like that, I think we've gotten away from semantic HTML, and I'm not sure if web browsers and engines like that are still dependent on these things. My intuition says they're not, because of the way of CSS and styling frameworks have proliferated over the years. But anyhow, so you have here, you've got these semantic elements like article, aside, details, fig caption, figure, footer, header, main, mark, nav, section, summary, time. And these are all pretty self-explanatory as to what they do. And you can come here on this page and you can see I'll put the link in the description, and you can come in here and read about the semantics and how they work. And I just wanted to make you aware that if you hear semantic HTML or semantic tags, this is what it's talking about. Okay? So let me go ahead and close that page. And so here we have, this is what I like about W3 schools, is sometimes it's a little buried, but they have lists of all the different tags. And then they'll have the same thing for like the JavaScript methods. They'll have a whole big long list that you can easily reference to find out JavaScript things. But looking here at the HTML element reference, you know, I wanted to make everyone aware of this web page, and it's a good reference to learn about tags. And what's really cool is these are linked. So right here we have a basic description, right? Well, if you want to learn about like the hyperlink, all you have to do is just right click and open link in a window, and then boom, you'll have an example. And again, what I really love about W3 schools is it's straightforward, it's simple, it's clean, and it's straight to the point, and it tells you what it's about. So I just wanted to let you know that this tags page exists, and this will be a great reference for you as you learn HTML and web development. Moving on, I'd like to talk about topics called inline and block elements, and that's referring to the various tags that you'll be using with HTML. And I'll be referencing this web page here a W3 schools, HTML block, and inline elements. And you can look at this page, I'll link it below, and this will give you an example of what all the typical block elements are and inline elements are. And now I want to demonstrate with the code what actually happens and what the difference is between inline and block elements. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way. Okay, so let's go block versus inline elements. Okay, we'll go ahead and comment that out. Okay, block versus inline. So let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and delete all the stuff we did from yesterday. We'll clear that out. We'll hit Control S to save. And let's go ahead and come here and let's clear out all the pilot stuff we learned. We'll clear that out. Make that, and hit Control S to save. So the big one we're all going to use a lot is a div tag. And we haven't learned that yet. And a div tag is kind of like a container, right? So let's go ahead and start typing a div tag. div tab. And we've made a div tag, right? We'll go ahead and hit enter to make some space. And then here's where you're going to put all your content, like your images and text. So now let's learn about some of the behaviors of a block element and the div tag. All right, so let's give this div a class. And we'll go ahead and hit class equals, we'll say div class underscore 00. Okay. And then we'll copy that and we'll come in here and let's make a class for that. So hit a period, Control V to paste, curly braces, there we go. Now let's make the background color, let's go ahead and make that blue violet for fun. Hit Control S to save, come here, Control S to save, and let's see what happens. Come here to our web browser and we'll refresh. Well, nothing happened. Well, why is that? Well, it's empty. And the way that the div tags work, it won't do anything until it has content inside of it. Hello everyone, this is Shauna in the post-production editing phase of the tutorial, part 2. And I was reviewing and editing the video and I wanted to actually comment on something about the default behavior of block elements and div tags. And as I mentioned, that the default nature of tags, they won't display anything like in here. It's empty, right? But the thing is, you'll learn this later on as you get more experience with CSS and styling. You can create you can force it to show. And what you'll have to do, and what I've done here, as you can see, I've made this div class min height underscore 10R. And basically what you have to do is explicitly tell the div to have a specific height. And with styling, there's a minimum height style that you can apply to your div. And in this case, to make it big, I have a 10 rem. So what you do is you just take this class, like here, like I did, and you add it to this empty div. And as you can see here, you know, down here on these other divs, we have the hello world. But this div is empty. And if you remember before, the empty div didn't show. But when you explicitly tell it to have a minimum height, well, you can come in here and you can see that this is the empty div that we just created. And again, you'll learn these things over time and trial by fire. And again, this is what makes styling and CSS kind of tricky and tedious and difficult and can be a pain. And this is a post-production editing note that I just wanted to inject here as we continue along with this tutorial. So let's go ahead and put something in there. Let's put a p tag and let's go hello world. And we'll go ahead and hit Control S to save, Control S to save again. We don't have to, just for good measure. Come here and hit refresh. Well, look at that. So now we've got the hello world. It's kind of hard to see, right? But you'll notice that the div tag, which we gave a class here, div class 00, and the background color is blue violet, you'll see that the div actually stretches across the whole screen, right? So that's the behavior of a div tag. And what you'll notice here is you have this white gap, right? Now you would think, well, hey, it's supposed to stretch the whole 100% of the screen. But you got to remember that these documents were modeled after books and newspapers. So when whoever invented this, and made these standards, they say, well, a div isn't 100%. It's 100% of the area, but not of the screen. Like you'll learn that the HTML, let me go ahead and pull this up here. You'll learn that the HTML is actually what they call the root of the document. So you can think of that as like the sheet, right? The sheet of paper, and then the body is going to have, and the body lays on top of the sheet, and then each of these divs is going to be kind of like, pretend you're cutting out a piece of paper, like for articles, making a scrapbook or something like that, and you paste each one of these divs on top of it. So you got to think of it like layers. Like this is going to be the bottom layer, and the body is going to be the next layer up, and then you're going to be laying your divs on top of the body, and your body's on top of the HTML. But that analogy will become more clear as we go along. I just wanted to point out that even though you say 100%, it's not 100% of the screen. And later on in the tutorial series, I'll show you how to deal with these kind of things if you want to work with the margins and padding that's already built into the elements, or if you want to override them to make them easier for you to work with. So let's go ahead for fun. Let's see what happens if we'll just go ahead and copy this, and we'll hit paste, and we'll save it, Control S, and we'll come back here, and we'll hit refresh. Boom. Well, as you can see, we've got white space around the div tag, okay? And that's one of the kind of frustrating things when you first get started with CSS styling, is dealing with padding and margins. And the reasons why people wanted to do those bootstrap things and why they're popular is it kind of takes the headache out of trying to deal with these alignments and padding and margin issues, but at the trade-off of having bloated frameworks. And but I digress. But you can see here, each div is going to have spacing between each div. And later on, as we get more advanced, I'll show you how to basically stack these on top of each other, which makes dealing with margins and gaps, it makes it easier for layout. We have all these divs with the content in there. They're kind of stacking on top of each other because they're 100%. And you're going to learn about a thing called float and page flow. Like how code is rendered from top to bottom and left to right, pages are also when actually render them out, the page flow is top to bottom and then left to right, unless you explicitly tell it otherwise. But that's a more advanced topic. So now let's go ahead and enter. No, this isn't the proper way to do it. So now let's go ahead and enter an inline element. And one of those is going to be a thing called a span. And let's go ahead and give this a class. And we'll say span class _00. All right. And then we'll come here, we'll copy that. And let's go ahead and make a span class. Go ahead and hit a period, and then paste it here for span class _00. We'll do the curly braces. So let's give a background color. Let's see what we should do. Let's do this chartreuse. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's like a matrix green. We'll just call it matrix green. And a span, we're just going to say span text here. And you'll learn how to use spans. And basically what a span will do later on is you can manipulate this span within like a p tag. You can embed it within a span, or you can embed the span within the p tag to actually change like font sizes or color sizes, or even update the data that might go in a dynamic element, P element. But we'll learn that later on. So let's go ahead and save that. Control S, come to Style Sheet, hit Control S, and then let's come to our page and we'll hit the refresh button. Span text here, okay. We'll see we've got padding, right? And that's because of the div. All right, so we've got a span text. And you'll notice that the span is only taking up as much of the area that the content inside needs. So what happens if we copy this and then we paste it, and then we'll say span here, span text here, 0, 0. Well, let's see what happens, right? Come here, come to the page, hit refresh. Hey, they're lining up side by side, and that's the name, inline, because they're in line. The line, you have to think of these things as lines. Like back in the day, they had teletypes and typewriters, right? And so they had a line by line. And when they say inline, you're staying, referencing back to the ancient era, this whole thing here, left to right, is a line. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and put another one here, copy, paste, make that. Control S to save, come here, refresh. You can see that it's just going inline and line and line, and it's not, and they're not going down to the next line, because block elements, they take up the whole space, and then they whatever the next line is going to start on the next line. Inline elements are just going to be one after the other, right? Now here's the deal. Let's go ahead and copy this. Let's make a whole bunch of them. We'll do 2, 3, and let's see what that gets us. All right, let's do a couple more. 4, 5. Hit Control S to save and refresh. Okay, we're almost out of space here, right? Let's do another one. Copy, paste, and hit 6, Control S, and we'll hit refresh. Uh-oh, what happened? Well, this is the behavior of an inline element. Once you run out of room here on the right, you're going to wrap around, or you're going to flow. Remember I mentioned that the page flows top to bottom, left to right? Well, once you have so many of these inline elements that reaches the end of it, it's not going to run off the screen. It's going to wrap around and it's going to go down here. Now, one of the things you got to be mindful of, especially when you get into responsive development, which is basically making a web application or a web page to be able to be read on like a desktop and a mobile and a tablet device or a smartphone, as you'll see, the further we scroll out, these inline text, these inline elements shrink down, they shrink down in relation to the screen percentage. But you'll notice that the block elements, they still stay 100% across. So you have to be mindful of these things when you get into responsive development. But coming back, let's go ahead and do a couple more just to show you. Okay, 7 and 8, Control S to save and refresh. So it's just going to keep doing this. It's just going to keep inline, inline, inline. So you'll see that it's continuing to stay in line, and we have the wraparound here. And you'll notice that the inline element, the span, only takes up so much space that it needs. The content within is really tightened up in, right? And you're going to have these little gaps, these little white spaces after that. And this is something that's inbuilt with the inline element itself. So you just need to be mindful that you're going to have these spaces, and you can build your own framework if you want to get rid of these spaces to make it more, to have more granular control over your layout. And of course you'll notice that there's this really teeny white space in here. It's hard to see, but the inline elements will have a little top and bottom white space when they stack, when they wrap around. So what happens if we put all of this into a div? And remember, we've got your div class. So we've copied the opening div tag. We'll paste it here. And we'll go ahead and make some space. We'll Control X to copy. And then Control V to paste. Hit Control S to save. Let me clean this up here. And I want to format my code. So all you have to do is highlight all of this. And hit Tab, and it'll move everything over. And it will indent to make the code formatted nicely. Control S to save. We'll come here. We'll hit the refresh and see what happens. And as you can see here, now we have all of our spans within a div, right? And you can see the purple background of the div, and you have the foreground background color of the span. So what happens if, now here's going to be a really cool shortcut for you to learn. What happens if we change all these spans to a paragraph? Well, let's go ahead and try it out. And one of the productivity hacks that I like to do, and I can show you, is to highlight part of the span, and you'll get better at how to do this and find out efficient ways to do this. You'll highlight it, you'll hold the Control and hit D. And what you can do is you can hit D again and again. I'm hitting D multiple times, right? And that'll highlight all the spans. But what you can do is delete all that and hit P, right? So we've changed all these P tags really easily all at one time instead of going line by line changing each one. And so that we'll do the same thing here. We'll come over here. So we want to change all these spans to P's to close out the P tag, right? So what you can do, like we did before, is highlight span. And what you want to do is incorporate the /. And what you can do is hold down Control, hit D, and you can highlight all of, we've highlighted all of the span. Now what you can do is use your arrow key. So we have it all, we have the cursors here, and what we can do is we can delete all of the A, N, and S, and now we've got our closing tags. And you'll get, and this is a really cool way to make a lot of changes all at once instead of going line by line and changing each span to P. And you'll figure out how to manipulate this and work with it to do changes like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and save it. Control S, and come back to our page and see what happens. So you'll see now that since we changed it to a P tag, the P tags are also block elements, and they take up 100% the whole entirety of the line. And you remember we're only in one div, right? So all these purple backgrounds is the one div that we're looking at. And you'll notice that each paragraph has a bottom margin on it. And as you get further along, you're going to have to deal with those things or write your own framework or understand whatever CSS framework, how those behaviors change with that particular framework. One of the next behaviors that I want to talk about is when you have a border. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a border class. Okay, border class _00. And let's make this a border, and we'll call it 3 pixels. And when it takes 3 parameters. It takes a pixel width, it takes the color and the type. And I just want to go ahead and do a solid border. Okay, so let's take this, copy that, and let's go ahead and here and put a border. Okay, so we'll come here and we'll hit refresh. So you see that now the border, you see how it changed when we changed it? The border kind of grew inside, and that's going to kind of like, I hate to use the word crush, but it'll like crush down your text on the inside, right? And you have to be mindful of these things when you deal with CSS and layout. So what happens if we delete that, Control X. And what happens if we come up here and put a border for each of our divs? Let's go ahead and see what happens, right? We'll go ahead and hit Control Save to say, or Control S to save it. Oh, well, what happened? The border caused all of the div elements to collapse. Okay, let's look at that again. So I'll come in here and I'll hit Control Z and I'll get rid of all the borders, right? We'll go ahead and hit Control S to save, and then we'll refresh it again. And we've got spaces again. Well, this is a thing you're going to have to learn about, and as you go along, you'll understand that borders will affect the flow, and it'll interfere with the how do you say, default settings of the elements. And this is what makes layout, CSS layout and styling frustrating, is, you know, if you apply a border, then you're going to have to deal with this kind of stuff. So now, if you want to have a space, you have to go in there and explicitly tell it, and you'll do that by saying something like margin bottom, and let's just go to rem, Control S to save. We'll come here and we'll hit refresh, and we have our space again. So when you get more involved with your styling, you're going to have to learn what styling elements, like a border, how it's going to affect your divs and your p tags and things like that. And you'll notice here, well, that looks ugly. Your hello world is right next to the border, right? And that doesn't look good. We're used to having a space. So now, well, you have a choice of either saying padding left, let's say 0.5 rem. Well, let's see what that happens. Now you're applying that to, that's being applied to this div, right? So what happens if we go ahead, and we're just going to roll with all these naming conventions for right now. So let's go ahead and Control Z and get rid of all that stuff, and kind of go back, get rid of all that, and we'll come back to the spans, right? So we have that span class that we had before, and remember, this is an inline element. Now what happens if we apply a border to an inline element? So we've made these changes, and so let's go ahead and we can go ahead and insert these, and instead of copying and pasting into each one, what we'll do is, like we did before, we'll highlight that, hold Control, hit D, and we're going to highlight all of these all at one time. And now just arrow over to use the right arrow to arrow to the end, and see how all the cursors are here at the right. Hit a space and hit Control V, and now we've applied the border class to all these elements. All right, Control S to save. Let's come here, refresh. Well, oh my gosh, what happened here? Well, we've applied that border to an inline element, but now we're having, the elements are overflowing, right? Because remember, we wrap around because of the elements. They only take up so much space as they needed, but when we apply the border to the inline element, the border kind of extends out from the element. And again, this is the frustrating thing of CSS and styling, and why people try to invent these frameworks instead of learning it in depth. It was to deal with things like this, and frustrating because it can be tedious to deal with styling these types of things. Styling inline and block elements is all confusing, right? So you'll see that now we've got the overlap, and if you're making your own framework or whatever, you're going to have to go in here, and you'll have to go in here and tweak all your elements, classes, and styles. So what happens if we take one of these divs, right? We'll copy the div, we'll paste it here, and we'll fix the code, format it. We'll copy all of these inline elements, Control X to cut, and paste here. And then we'll select it all, and then hit Tab, and hit Control S, and we'll come to our page and see what happens. Refresh. Well, here we go. Even though all this stuff is embedded within the or nested or a child of the div, all these spans, well, now the border is bleeding over the inline elements are bleeding over the div. And so that's where you have to come in here and to get more in depth with your div class, and you'll have to come in here and put a padding of, let's say, 1 rem. We'll go ahead and hit Control S to save that. Come in here, hit refresh. Well, good Lord, now everything's blowing up. And this is because of a thing called float, and we'll learn about that later on. So, and this is why CSS can be very frustrating for people to learn and to handle and things like that. So now we need to come in here and hit float left and see what happens. Well, now it's all jumbled up again. Now I've collapsed, and it just goes down this dark, frustrating rabbit hole, and yeah, and we'll get into why all this happens later on, but for right now I just want to show you things that you're going to have to deal with later on. And as you can see here, we've got all these span texts. Well, this now broke. Before, it just went over to the next side, and so now our web page is all hosed up. It doesn't make any sense, and we're all confused now about why these things happen. But as we go along in this series, I'll explain how to fix these things and actually build a nice clean framework on your own so that you have granular control and you know what's going on. But let me go ahead and Control Z and get back to something like we had beforehand. But basically, I didn't want to get too far ahead and deep into the jungle and weeds. But today I just wanted to talk about the difference between block elements and once again referencing W3 schools. They have a nice, really laid out website, and it shows you like here are block level elements, and then you have your inline elements. And I really encourage you to come in here and play around with all these different types of block and inline elements, and just like I did here, like we did here, mess around with the code and try different things and see what works and see what doesn't work, and break things and make things ugly and overlapping each other this way, so you know firsthand why things do the things they do. And as we go along in the series, we'll talk more about things like border collapse and margin collapse and floats, and how to deal with these kinds of things in your styling. But for right now, that's a good little tutorial about inline and block element stylings. And go out and have some fun with it. See ya.